Hello, everybody. Just a quick announcement to make before we get into this week's special bonus episode. A couple of exciting things to announce. First of all, we posted this on social media earlier this week, but particularly for UK listeners, particularly for London listeners and people within reach of London, we've got some very exciting screenings planned. We are going to be collaborating with one of the best cinemas in London, the Genesis Cinema, for a series of cult and horror screenings, hosted by me and other friends of the pod. This is called Evolution of Horror Presents. And with Evolution of Horror Presents, we're going to be curating and screening a bunch of the weirdest and creepiest and most classic cult movies. So we've already got the first couple of events planned. So come and join us on the 30th of March at the Genesis Cinema for a screening of modern classic One Cut of the Dead. I will be introducing the film and then we will all get to watch it together on the big screen. And it's a really fantastic experience watching that film with an audience. That'll be so much fun. And then even more excitingly, our April screening on the 26th of April, we are going to be screening one of my favourite movies of all time by my favourite director of all time, David Lynch's Eraserhead. Oh my God. Now, if you haven't seen David Lynch's Eraserhead on the big screen, or if you haven't seen it at all, get yourself a ticket and come along to this screening. It's going to be such a fun night. That's the 26th of April from about 7:30 p.m. We're going to be hosting drinks in the bar, and then the film will kick off at 9 p.m. after a special introduction. It's going to be so much fun. I'm going to be at all these screenings, of course, along with a bunch of other friends of the pod. The brilliant Becky Dark, who is kind of my sort of partner in all of this. She's going to be organising these screenings with me, so she's going to be there at all of them as well. And I'm sure a whole bunch of other friends of the pod will be at some of these events, so you can come along, meet some of us, have some drinks, and see some absolute horror and cult classics on the big screen. After Eraserhead, we've got some other really incredible movies and really incredible events planned for the rest of the year. So just keep an eye out. It's not just going to be introductions as well. For some of these screenings, we'll be hosting panels. We'll be recording live podcasts. For some of them, we might be hosting a special quiz. There might even be some live ghost story readings. A lot of really exciting, spooky events. So that's the Evolution of Horror Presents. That's a brand new strand in collaboration with the Genesis Cinema. And I will link how you can get tickets in the show notes. And if you want to be kept up to date with screenings, events, merchandise, new episodes, and anything else, then you can now sign up to the Evolution of Horror newsletter. We've launched a new monthly newsletter, and that will be the first place we'll be alerting people about tickets for events and various other bits and pieces. So sign up to that. Just go to evolutionofhorror.com/newsletter. Again, I will link to that in the show notes. All right, please enjoy this week's very special bonus episode as we discuss new releases Fresh and X. Welcome back to the Evolution of Horror. My name is Mike Munzer, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres one series at a time. However, we're currently in the middle of a little hiatus. We finished our 7th series on the evolution of the alien horror film back at the beginning of this year, and we will be kicking off our 8th series on the evolution of the vampire film in the summer of 2022. But I couldn't resist this opportunity to drop a little bonus episode because this weekend sees the release of so many incredible new horror films. It really is, I think, one of the best weekends in recent memory for new horror stuff. There are movies dropping on various streaming services, movies being released in cinemas, all of which I would call absolute gems and some of the best horror films I've seen in a very long time. So we are going to be discussing 2 of those new releases in depth this week. So later on in the second half of this episode, I'll be joined by friend of the pod, Stevie Webb, and we will be talking about the new Ty West film, X. That will be a spoiler-free discussion, followed by a spoilerific section, of course. Not only that, you'll also hear my little interview with the filmmaker, the legend that is Ty West. So that's all to come later on in this episode. But in the first half of this week's bonus episode, we're going to be discussing the new movie by director Mimi Cave called Fresh. Now, this film dropped in the US on, I believe, Hulu a couple of weeks ago, so quite a lot of our American listeners have already seen it, but it comes out this weekend in the UK on Disney+. So me and my guest discussed Fresh, first of all spoiler free, then with a little spoilerific section. Not only that, I got to chat to the director of Fresh, Mimi Cave. So please enjoy the first half of this week's episode on Fresh.
What's his Instagram? I want to stalk a little bit.
He doesn't have one.
Say what?
Yeah.
Oh no, see, that's shady.
Let's play a game. Tell me something you don't want me to know.
I hate this.
Okay.
Put all our hopes of finding happiness through someone else.
Yeah.
Girl, you were all digmatized and I haven't even seen this dude.
What's going on?
I'm gonna tell you, but you're gonna freak out.
No, this isn't happening.
Yeah, it's happening. No games. Know what you wanted?
So joining me to discuss Fresh, she's a long-time friend of this podcast. She's also host and creator of the Zobo with a Shotgun podcast. She is the creator of the very successful Ghouls magazine, the brilliant Zoe Rose Smith. Hi, Zoe. How you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me back. Been a while, but I'm excited to come back.
It has been a while. It's been a long time. Yeah, it's so good to have you back. And congratulations on Ghouls Magazine. The weekend that this is coming out, Ghouls Magazine turns 1 year old, right? Happy birthday.
Thank you. Yeah, we're very excited to be having our birthday. I think for me, it's just all about the cake at this moment, which, you know, definitely going to buy a lot of cake. But yeah, very exciting stuff to be having our first birthday.
I love it. Well, it's a big weekend. There's a lot of good horror releases to talk about. We're here to talk about Mimi Cave's Fresh. Zoe, I read on Twitter that you were a fan of this, so I had to get you on to discuss it. It's a difficult one to discuss, isn't it? Because I almost don't want to reveal too much to people that haven't seen it. I don't know about you, but I sort of went into this film not knowing anything at all, and it really took me by surprise, you know?
Yeah, I kind of went into it a little bit blind as well, actually. I think a lot of people kind of have probably seen stuff online, and I think from the promos and the press and also like the poster, you can get an idea of what it's going to be about. But I do feel like going into it without too many expectations or a little bit blind did kind of help. But I do still think if you knew what it was about generally, you're still going to have a good time with it.
I agree. It's just so much fun, isn't it? So let's get into it. We'll start with a little spoiler-free discussion. I'm not even going to ask you to summarize the plot, but let's just... the first thing I want to ask you is, what did you think of Fresh? You're a fan, right?
I absolutely loved it. It was, as we kind of said, really didn't know what to expect at all. I just saw a few people mention it to me and be like, think this one's going to be up your street. And when someone says that, I'm usually like, oh, okay, it's going to be a bit weird. Isn't it?
It's going to be fucked up.
And yeah, safe to say that it hit those tones for me very, very well. And I think actually, you know, compared to a lot of the other films that, I mean, you know, Mike, we've done the mini extreme season for your Patreon, which went, you know, quite into the depths of some of the nastier stuff. I think this film is a really good film that approaches some of those themes and topics, but a little bit more lightly, and probably is, you know, a bit more for the I don't want to use the word mainstream because I don't think any horror fans are mainstream, but, you know, it's not as extreme or nasty, but it's also very, very fun in a way that makes you feel bad for having fun.
Right. I completely agree. There's something quite alluring about it, even though it's quite horrible, right? And that was one of the first things I was going to ask you. Obviously, as Queen of the Extreme, Zoe, I was going to ask you whether or not you would include Fresh as an example of kind of extreme cinema, because it really does sort of tease different genres, doesn't it? You know, when it starts, it's almost playing with kind of rom-com tropes. It doesn't even feel like a horror film initially, right? Yeah. And then it suddenly wallops you with like, oh my God, what the hell am I watching, right? And I think it does that kind of tonal and genre balance so well throughout. I loved this film as well.
Yeah, no, it does. That's the thing. If you do go into it like quite blind, you're kind of going, right, I can't really see how this is going to go. And I think it looks like it's going quite a streamlined, linear way where you go, oh yeah, you know, I can tell what's going to happen here. And then like you said, you go, oh, fuck, I did not see that coming quite in that way. And kind of going back to your previous question about whether it sits within the extreme world, I think, do you know what? I think it does sit within that realm. I think it's probably, you know, you might have seen a few months ago, someone did that horrendous iceberg of extreme films, which...
That's right. Yeah.
Don't go to the bottom. Don't even go to the last 3 layers. Like, even I don't want to go there, trust me. But right. I would say this kind of sits at the top of the iceberg. And it could be like quite a nice introduction to the bit of the darker side of cinema, I think.
I agree. It is dark and it does have some stuff that makes you go, oh my God. But at the same time, it's not quite in the same league as some of the historic extreme stuff that we've discussed together, for example, Zoe, is it? It's, you know, and I wonder whether I think that's partly just because times have changed. Maybe because this is directed by a woman compared to so many other extreme movies we've discussed that have been made by dudes. But this movie doesn't quite have that uncomfortable sleaziness, I suppose, that a lot of extreme cinema has.
Yeah, it is much, much less sleazy than immediate. Yeah, some of the ones that immediately spring to mind, and specifically, you know, thinking of like when we covered the guinea pig films, and they're, you know, they're quite sleazy in the way that they portray it. But I think do you know what? I think it probably is because it's made by a woman. I think, you know, stripping out that kind of female gaze element of it, which is one of the things that, you know, so many people have a problem with when it comes to more of the extreme things, because it is, you know, just seeing like a naked woman tortured, bound, and just staring at her from all angles, which you go, oh yeah, probably didn't need to be doing that right now. Whereas this, it doesn't really go there, which I think makes it feel like you don't see as much, but it doesn't take away from the fact that it does still feel pretty like nasty and nihilistic to watch.
Yeah, I completely agree. And what do you think briefly of the performances? So it's really kind of mainly rests on these two main characters, right? Noah and Steve, played by Daisy Edgar-Jones and Sebastian Stan. What do you think of them? And were you very familiar with these two actors sort of before seeing this film?
No, I think I'm not actually sure what I've seen Daisy in before. Sebastian Stan, the only thing that I really saw was a lot of memes going around on Twitter of being like, can we have more Sebastian Stan in horror films? And I wasn't really that familiar with him. Not going to lie, did watch this and kind of go, shouldn't fancy him as much as I do, considering the topic of this movie. Watched it with my boyfriend, and he was like, immediately he was like, I can tell you really fancy him, don't you? And I was like, no. And he was like, is it because he's this kind of character? And I was like, yeah, maybe, yeah.
I mean, yeah, and I think that's really interesting as well, that and this is something I spoke to the director about, but like I think there's an element of that quite clever casting because he's so clean cut, and also because he is known for being in Marvel films predominantly. Like, I think he's done some other stuff recently, like the Pam and Tommy thing, which apparently he's really good at. I haven't seen him in that, but he's so well known for being Captain America's best mate and sidekick, like, which is so kind of wholesome, right, and family friendly. And I think playing on his kind of reputation, I suppose, in some ways, in a film like this, and then subverting it is quite a fun thing. I guess it's kind of similar to when people like Robert Pattinson has done horror since doing things like Twilight and stuff like that. I guess it's a kind of similar vibe, you know, those people wanting to do something a bit more dark, a bit more twisted, you know.
I feel like everyone in their career gets to that point where they go, oh, shall I do that nasty little horror film? I've been off it, And you go, you know, you join at Christmas time and they're like, what did you work on recently? They're like, wow, you thought I was just all Marvel, didn't you? But here you go. This is what I've done. But I really like him in this, actually. And he reminded me of when Zac Efron played Ted Bundy. Which I know a lot of people didn't like that casting, which me, for someone, I did love High School Musical. I'm not ashamed to admit that. So I loved Zac Efron. So seeing him as Ted Bundy, I was like, oh, I think it's that. And I think that's exactly what they do so well in Fresh with the casting, you know, that Mimi Cave has done so well, is taking, like you said, someone that's so clean cut, but also kind of, I think when you think of someone that's a bad guy, you typically think, oh, they're a bit gross, like you wouldn't want them to touch you. Whereas, you know, you think of like serial killers, typically like Ted Bundy, for instance, going back to the Zac Efron reference point. And it puts you off because you shouldn't be going, oh, but they're quite attractive. You know, I wouldn't, he is exactly the kind of guy that you would bump into at the supermarket and go, yeah, I'll go on a date with him. Like, he seems quite nice. Yeah. And then you get to where you get to and you're going, oh, but now I'm a little bit confused by all of this, which is why I think it's really, really good casting. And he's so good in this as well. It's like their kind of relationship throughout the film, they play off one another so well. Yeah,
their chemistry is so good, isn't it? Yeah. Daisy Edgar-Jones is excellent as well. And I'd never really seen her in anything. I know she was in that TV show Normal People, which a load of people loved. My partner absolutely, she loved it at the time. And I've had a lot of people rave about it. I've never seen it, but she's really good in this, I think, isn't she, as well? Like the kind of emotional sort of journeys and highs and lows that she goes on in this film, and she kind of takes us with her on this fucked up journey, doesn't she? I think, and she's really good.
Yeah, I think she's so good at like encompassing all, like you said, all of those different emotions, and you know, she goes through a lot of scenarios throughout the film. Some that, you know, I think as a female, like in, you know, thinking about dating, etc., like definitely been in those scenarios, definitely kind of gone and reacted in that way. And then she's obviously in a lot of scenarios that perhaps are not as, you know, hopefully not many of us have found ourselves in similar situations to that. But she again approaches it with what comes across as like a very kind of rational approach to it. It never feels like she's acting out of turn or completely over the top, which I think in, you know, so many horror films, you sit there and it's so easy to go, well, I wouldn't do that, or that's stupid to do, like making those mistakes that typically frustrate the shit out of us as horror fan watchers. Whereas in this, I was going, yeah, no, I'd probably do the same at that point, which I think makes it so much easier to put yourselves in her position.
Yeah, you're so right. It makes it such a pleasure to watch, doesn't it? I think because she is a smart character. She's a resourceful character. She does the stuff that you'd want your main character in a horror film to do, and I love that about her. What a joy to watch in so many ways, right? I think we should leave the spoiler-free discussion at that. We'll go on to our spoilerific section in just a moment, but first of all, I'm going to play some of my interview with the director of Fresh, Mimi Cave. Again, very, very minor spoilers. We don't talk about too many plot specifics in this interview, but if you don't want to be spoiled on anything at all, maybe go watch the film before listening to the interview. But here is my chat with the Fresh director, Mimi Cave. Mimi Cave, hello. How you doing?
Hi, I'm good, Mike. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really good. First of all, congratulations on Fresh. I absolutely loved it. What a thrilling ride that was.
Thank you.
Just start off by telling us a little bit about how you came to this project and what was it about this story that appealed to you?
Yeah, I got my hands on the script sort of through a friend of a friend, and I just kind of was a little bit like thrown off balance by reading it because I wasn't really given any context when I did read it. So I was really like, what is this? And it was kind of that there was enough of that made me feel like I had to at least try to discover how I might approach it and pitch myself for the job. So yeah, I didn't really expect I would actually get the job.
I love it. That's amazing. And you're right. I mean, the story does throw you off, doesn't it? When I went into this, I knew absolutely nothing about it, which was such a thrill in a way. And I had no idea where this story was taking me from one scene to the next. And it plays really interestingly with different tropes from different genres, I would say. You know, we've got some real hardcore, almost Hostel-esque horror in here, along with rom-coms, along with some other stuff. How was that for you as a director, kind of tackling, I suppose, and balancing all those different genres and tones and that kind of thing?
I think that was the biggest challenge of the film and of the story. And I knew if I were to, direct this movie, that that would be the thing that would kind of always be on my mind, of trying to balance it. And it's hard to tell because a lot of things tonally you can't tell until you're in the edit with the movie and watching it back as a whole. So it was a lot of just trying to instinctually make sure that the characters that we've rooted with their feet on the ground stay there, and the others who, start to kind of get more and more ridiculous. It serves as that nice balance where you make sure you always have at least one character you can come back to and relate to.
It is an outlandish idea, but also I think what's quite scary about it is that there's something quite believable about it. Do you think that there is anything like this? Is there any grain of truth in this? Is there the possibility that something like this and what happens in this movie could exist?
I think so. I mean, it's not based on anything. It's completely fictional, but if you want to take the risky thing of Googling stuff like that, it does exist in the world. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so strange and scary, is because the concept is so out there to so many of us. And I think that there are people in history who have done these things, very few, but that's why I think it is so scary, because it's kind of like the very edge of humanity, and, but yeah, at the same time, there's a sort of like a nod to a certain type of person in this world who thinks they can have anything they want and has no issues going after it because of maybe the protection of the wealth they have or their power. So I think that whether that's cannibalism or Jeffrey Epstein and a form of human trafficking, I think that those things do exist. I don't know of any specifically outside of that, but yeah, I think that fear is real.
Yeah, I think, and it's such a beautiful sort of metaphor for the horror genre, isn't it? This idea of this incredibly privileged, handsome white dude who is literally eating and consuming and taking what he wants from anyone else. Tell us a little bit about, obviously those themes were sort of in the original script, but tell us a bit about, how you sort of through your direction, through casting choices and that kind of thing, really brought those themes and that kind of social commentary to the fore.
Yeah, I mean, it's like when you're in the process of filmmaking, you're really just doing things in the moment and making really big decisions based on a gut feeling. And so a lot of it is that. A lot of it is like tapping into what certain parts of the script or certain themes kind of make you feel or what they remind you of. And then also seeking out research and other films that do things in a certain way, either to find inspiration or to avoid repeating something, which I think these days is harder and harder because there's just, we've been on this planet for however long we have. And so there's just so much work out there that it's, I don't think it's doing anyone a service to try to pretend like those things don't exist. Like there's a few sort of shots in my film that are very direct homages to other films, because I felt like I didn't ever want to feel like I was ripping anything off. But if I were to find something really inspirational, I was going to just directly nod to it.
That's really cool. What sort of titles specifically were you sort of nodding towards or inspired you?
I think that structurally, the script had a lot of similarities, weirdly enough, to Get Out. And because that film and because Jordan Peele had just done this sort of mash of genre so well, it was one of the only films I could look to in like, recent years that had just done it so well. But on the other hand, there's other movies too that are more indie or have been done a long time ago that have some fun elements to it. I think American Psycho is a big inspiration, but in a lot of ways that tone that that film has is quite different. Mostly because of the way the storytelling is. There's a VO, throughout for Patrick Bateman, like the whole thing is told through his eyes, and we weren't doing that. So
yeah.
So you kind of like find little bits and pieces of things that, oh, someone did it that way. That's really interesting. That might work for Fresh, and sort of things like that. But yeah, there are a lot. There's a lot of inspirations, and a lot of times the inspirations aren't from other films. They're from visual artists and paintings and music and things like that. So
that's very cool. Did you, and going back to the idea of that tonal balance as well, it's a little bit like Get Out. The movie does such a good job of balancing comedy and horror, which I think are two quite difficult things to kind of get in equal measure. Again, how was that for you as a director, kind of pulling that off? Is it similar, sort of trying to time and pull off a scare in and also sort of trying to time and pull off a good joke, right, or a laugh? What are the kind of differences and similarities there?
The similarities I think are that both have, editing in film has a musicality to it if it's done well. And I think comedy is very musical in terms of its pacing, and anyone who writes comedy will tell you that there's has to be a bit of a rhythm and a cadence to make a joke on screen work. And whether that's like a very cut and dry punchline joke or something that just is a funny scene. So I think also with horror, there's that as well, but it's done in a different way. So the pacing of a scare or maybe a feeling is all about how much you're drawing something out, and drawing it out enough so that the audience is ready for it and also fearing it coming, but also not drawing it out too much to where you kind of the audience gets a little annoyed, where they're like, come on, just like, what is it? So I think that's a really fun challenge to try to figure out. And definitely there was a lot of zhuzhing of things in the post side of it to make sure that we weren't leaning too heavily in one direction or the other.
Well, I love it when it really does go full horror in the second half of this film. And there's some really grisly, gross stuff here, some body horror, some gore, that kind of thing, which I loved. Were you able to push that as much as you wanted, or were you ever worried about pushing the gore too far?
Well, I'm curious to think which parts you thought were gory, because there's actually not a lot of gore in there. It's a lot of food.
Maybe that's what it is. It's the eating.
And so it's interesting that that's something that people are calling gore, because if you watched it out of context, it would just be food. Yeah. So that's what I like about, what we did with it. I think there were more gory, the way that the surgery scenes were written were very explicit and, to sort of like serve a purpose of the shock value in the reading of the script. But in making the film, I took almost all of it out. So it was really more about looking in Noah's eye and feeling scared and seeing reflections that something scary was happening, but not being able to feel it, and feeling trapped and feeling like what is happening, and then showing just a tiny glimpse of what actually was happening, because you don't need to show more than that. It's already pretty terrifying.
It is. Tell us a little bit about casting. Sebastian Stan and Daisy Edgar-Jones, they're both so good in this, such good chemistry, not necessarily the sort of people you might initially think for a story like this as well, which is really interesting. Just tell us a little bit about your casting choices there and working with these two.
Yeah. I've said this a couple times in interviews, but it's not to be missed, which is that they're both actors that have a really strong level of commitment. And I've only worked with them on this particular project, but I couldn't have anyone who had any sort of hesitation. There had to be a level of sort of like all in that I knew that if that wasn't there, it would be readable on screen. And so, everyone who was cast in this movie had that and really saw something in the script that they connected to and wanted to be a part of it, even if it was like, the actor who plays Chad, Brett Dyer, or Dio who plays Paul, those actors can get bigger roles and they really wanted to be a part of Fresh because they felt like it was really different and important and interesting. And so everyone involved was really like fully in, and Daisy and Sebastian, they had to take on a lot in order to carry the story. And I knew Daisy could hold the lead because of the work she had done in Normal People. I wasn't worried about that at all. And I knew that Sebastian, he's had a long like resume of roles. And I knew that he was going to bring something kind of unique to Steve based on his role in I, Tonya.
And Sebastian Stan, like I, Tonya, Pamela and Tommy, he's done some really interesting projects lately. But I would say, broadly speaking, the world might know him the most from Captain America films, right? Something quite wholesome, family friendly. So I think that's a really interesting subversion here of his persona, in a way, his public image. Was that something deliberate, again, for you on your part?
Yeah, it became interesting. But to be totally honest, I'd never seen a Marvel movie before casting him.
Amazing. How have you managed to avoid them?
I don't know. I'm not drawn into them, and not to say anything about them. I just tend to be more interested in smaller films. And so I didn't even know he was in Marvel movies. That's how little I knew. And really was casting him off of his acting in other films, which I think was the right intention.
When I've loved this kind of wave of horror that we've had over the last few years from people like yourself, from Robert Eggers, Ari Aster, Jordan Peele, Mike Flanagan, Jennifer Kent, Prano Bailey Bond, Rose Glass. These films are really reaching, I think, new audiences outside of the kind of traditional horror world. They're also reaching critics and award bodies and that kind of thing. What's your view on horror and the way that it's kind of evolved and changed recently over the last few years? I mean, some horror fans have kind of accused horror recently of going soft. Other people have the opposite reaction. What are your thoughts? I
think a lot of those filmmakers you mentioned did a really awesome job inviting more types of audiences into the genre. And that comes through comedy, through social commentary, through involving certain types of actors that are familiar. And I think that it does open it up to other people. I'm not a huge horror film buff. I don't seek it out. But I have more in the last few years because I think it's also certain filmmakers handle the genre delicately in a way that is less about just like splattering blood at the screen and more about, mixing in a thriller aspect to it. So, yeah. And I think it'd be really interesting to go back in time and see, based on what's happening in the world, how well horror films are doing. I think that right now it's a way to have a cathartic experience. And there's a lot of difficult things and realities happening around us. And sometimes, weirdly enough, watching something that has a darker theme, but also has an entertainment value to it, like Squid Games, can allow you to kind of like have a little bit of catharsis that is needed, especially right now.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mimi. My last question for you, which I like to ask all my interviewees, what's your favorite horror movie?
Honestly, I mean, this is less of a horror film, but it's the first thing that came to my head is Black Swan.
Oh, great choice.
That movie, I grew up as a dancer, and that movie really got under my skin and made me nauseous in certain moments in a way that no other film has. So I think Darren Aronofsky actually is pretty amazing at eliciting those responses.
Yeah, Mother did the same thing too, right? Like, absolutely.
I mean, do you remember? Yeah, do you remember seeing Requiem for a Dream for the first time?
Oh my God! I mean, I've covered that on this podcast because to me that is a horror film, right? That is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, but I didn't know that watching it when I was younger, and really, like, it gave me nightmares for sure. So, Yeah, I think Black Swan is one of my favorite films. So
Amazing choice. Mimi, thank you so much for your time.
thank you, Mike.
And there we go. A big thank you to the brilliant Mimi Cave. Okay, at this point in our fresh discussion, we are going to go full spoilers from this point onwards. So, Zobo, I want to roughly kind of go through this film in order and start off by asking you a little bit about the first act, when we're in that kind of more of a rom-com place, right? When we're in a movie about the horrors of online dating. I personally, I've been in a long-term relationship for many, many years. I've never really been on the dating, particularly the online dating scene. But do you think it felt like it kind of pulled all of that off very accurately with a lot of kind of nuance there, the general kind of horror of meeting people night after night and going through this kind of dating hell in a way, you know?
Yeah, and I didn't do long on the dating scene, to be honest. But when I was dating, it was all through the apps. You know, it was Tinder. Mm-hmm. Tinder was the big one. Right. And yeah, I think I constantly downloaded it, fatigued it, was like, I hate everyone. Then at some point got like a stalker and was like, do you know what, I'm going to delete it. Then I was like, let's go back on it. Even came and, you know, similar to what you see in this, came back around after the whole, you know, I might have to get the police involved, and even went, oh, would you like to come along to my boxing show? And I was like, are you mad? Like, do you not remember what happened? So it does feel very relevant in terms of like how tiring it is to go dating, and also the fact that, you know, people, you've got to go on these dates and sit through people, and you're just going, oh God, this is an absolute waste of my time. Like, there is nothing going on between us. And, you know, a few of my friends now are still, they're like 7 years on the dating scene. And poor things, they call me afterwards and they're like, you know, people put, I mean, lots of people lie about lots of things on dating apps. And, you know, my friend, she said she's been on some dates and she's like, I just don't understand the difference between the person that you see on the app versus the person that then turns up personality wise is a complete douchebag, like we see Noah puts up with in the opening act of the film.
Yeah, God. And actually, speaking of that, I mean, like, you know, like you say, sort of chatting to your friends off the back of some of these dates and that kind of thing. How accurate was that portrayal of it too? Because I think there's a really lovely kind of main sort of friendship here, isn't there, between Noah and her best friend, and they have this kind of dynamic where they're like, text me to make sure you're okay after this date and this kind of thing. And obviously that kind of plays into the plot as it goes on and everything. But all of that seemed quite sort of natural and real as well, you know?
Yeah, so real. And I really like that the film actually picks up on that element, because obviously, you know, there's a lot of social commentary here around, you know, what's been happening in the news. You think of Sarah Everard, which happened, you know, last year, all about that kind of element of safety. And I think a lot of women online, especially, you know, single women or women that live by themselves, have shared a lot of these texts where it is you know, can you text me when you get home, please? Can you give me a call whilst you're going home? You know, my friends, when they're dating, I'm like, can you share your location if you're going somewhere? Can you give me a call? Like, I need to know where you are. If they're going, oh, I'm staying over the night, I'm like, in the middle of the night, if you get up, can you drop me a text? Still, like, in the morning, call me, because there is a lot of the worry around safety that, you know, you go on a date with someone, you've got no idea. I remember when I first went, you know, now he's my partner, luckily didn't turn out to be complete weirdo, probably the other way around, to be honest, but, you know, he
was texting his mates going, oh my God, save me.
I think he still does, you know, together like, 7 years, and he's still going, oh my God, I'm worried what's going to happen tonight. But, you know, even on that first date, I came into London, didn't live in London. So many of my friends were like, because I got drunk, obviously I didn't text them, did stay at his house on the first date, my phone in the morning. You know, all my friends like, great, are you dead? Are you murdered? Me calling them, being like, haha, no, I got drunk. I thought it was safer to stay at his house. They're like, glad you're okay. But it is quite, it really portrays how it is dating as a female. I mean, I don't know how it is for a male. I'm sure it's the same for a lot of men as well. But, you know, I guess as a female, there's quite a lot of safety issues around dating.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I think there's something really interesting as well about the like the dating app side of it too, because you do get this feeling, and I've heard so many people say this. People do say it, don't they? Where they're like, "Oh, I wish I could meet." I've had friends say to me like, "I wish I could meet somebody like the old school way, where you meet them in a bar or you know, whatever." Like almost like looking back on those days nostalgically, right? But I think what's really fun about this film as well is that does happen. She meets Sebastian Stan organically in a way, right, at the supermarket, and but then it turns out he's not on social media, and then that's alarm bells too, right? Where it's like, what do you mean he doesn't have Instagram and he doesn't have Twitter and stuff? And it's like that then also kind of raises red flags for people, doesn't it?
Yeah,
as well,
and
really
I
funny.
mean, I work in social media, so for me, I am like, my friends ask me to, like, if they start dating someone, I'm letting all the secrets out here now, Mike. But if they start dating someone, they ask me to do like investigate them on social media. Honestly, give me 5 minutes, I can find out who they are, where they're from, all their ex-girlfriends. Like, I love that shit. I live for investigators. So if anyone's listening to this, if I know you, I probably have stalked you back to like 10 years ago. I'm good at it.
Yeah.
But it is a bit of a warning sign, because I think, you know, we're so used to now in this day and age being able to find out, you know, people's lives just through online, and without that it does kind of go, well, what are they hiding? And it's not necessarily always the truth, but then you watch Fresh and you go, no, if they don't have an Instagram, I am not going to date them, and there's a good reason why.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, that, isn't it? That, like, we all kind of scoff at how much time we spend on social media, but then when someone doesn't have it, we're like, what? You know, it's like we're so used to it now. You know?
I mean, I met a friend at work last year, and he said to me, he was like, "Oh, I don't have any social media." I was like, "What do you do with spare time?" I was like, "What do you do?" And he was like, "Well, I go out with friends." And I was like, "And how do you contact them?" He was like, "Yeah, no, I text them." I was like, "Oh my God." I was like, "This is disgusting." I was like, "Do not text me. We cannot be friends."
That is brilliant. I love it. Yeah, so she meets this guy, this like charming man at the supermarket, right? They hit it off straight away. Like, and did you kind of have an idea? Like, how much did you know going into this? Did you know that he was going to be a wrong and that he was going to be a cannibal before sort of going into this?
I had the feeling he was going to be a wrong un, because I was like, how can that good a looking man just be there eating, you know, delicious grapes at the supermarket and be so charming, like all the good cocktails, you know, just kind of tick all the boxes. I was like, there is something wrong with him for sure. Didn't see cannibal coming. Didn't no.
Me neither. Should have known, really, from the title and the sort of poster as well. I think I'd seen like a still image of like a hand in a meat packet.
Yeah.
But I didn't necessarily know that's where it was going. And I was like, oh, holy shit, at the moment when, you know, she's drugged and then wakes up tied to a mattress. And I'm like, oh, we're in that film now. Like, it suddenly almost went to like Hostel or something, didn't it, at that point in the film? I was like, I just was not expecting that at all. You know, it was great.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, same as you, like, it feels like all the right clues were there, but at the same time, like, I kind of thought it might be a zombie movie, actually. I was like, fresh, you know, and I was like, couple, maybe like one of them turns into a zombie. It's like a you know, and I knew there was the romantic part of it, so I was like, maybe it's like one of those zombie rom-coms. But I mean, I do have to say myself, obviously, when she woke up tied to the bed, I was like, yes, I'm getting a torture movie.
Yeah, it straight away goes up a couple of stars in Zoe's book at that point. It's like, here we go.
Yeah, I was so excited.
And it does, like, it really goes hard on that stuff for that section of the film too, doesn't it? Like, it's genuinely quite upsetting, like the way because I do think the film is really well handled in terms of the tone, because it's so sort of light and fun, and it isn't until about 40 minutes in, right, when we actually even get the title card, I think, at that point, when she's drugged and knocked out and he is revealed to be a wrong un, and then it's like fresh, and it's like, here's the film you're watching kind of thing. And the way that it then just completely flips and changes I thought it was so clever. I loved it.
Yeah, I really liked that. And you know, that kind of shift in the tone of it, I think, works really well, because I think there's, you know, I love being taken by surprise by a film, especially where you're kind of like, haha, laughing, it's quite lighthearted. I think that sudden shift kind of reminded me of Audition, in the fact that, Audition probably drags on slightly bit longer, but you watch it for so long kind of going, oh, this is the film I'm expecting, this is what I'm getting, and then all of a sudden you go, oh no, it's completely different. And I think it was such a good idea as well to put, like you said, that title card there, because it does almost feel like you watch kind of like a pre-movie, and then the film that goes, you thought you were going to be watching a nice little rom-com, but this is what you're really getting. And then it does go pretty dark. And I felt like there were a few moments where I laughed, and I was like, should I laugh? Is that all right to laugh at that bit? Like, it does make you feel really uncomfortable.
And it really is, it's juggling a lot of kind of themes, isn't it? And sort of social commentary as well. There is obviously this kind of like gender dynamic at play, but then also this kind of class thing too, right? Yeah. I think comes into it at this point, because the idea is that he is like kidnapping women, basically like removing parts of them and selling them for their meat, right, to like really, really rich clients. This idea that there's this like 1% of these kind of weirdos on the black market who are really into this kind of thing, right, and buy women's flesh, and he like packages them up with other little souvenirs, like he'll put like their underwear in the same package or photos of them and stuff like that as well, right? And it's those little details too where I was thinking, I could believe if this actually existed as well. Like, they're probably, the internet is a pretty dark place. There's probably corners of it out there where people are doing this kind of thing.
That's the thing about it. It's like almost that joke where it's like, you go on a date and you're like, oh, don't get kidnapped and murdered. We all right. Joke about those things, like, oh, maybe he's going to eat you, chop you up, put you in the freezer. Like, it's a joke that we say. But then when you look at it in this context, and like you said, with those the pictures with the underwear, my mind immediately went to things like OnlyFans and Patreon, because of course, it's not like that at all. But I was like, I was having a funny conversation with a friend the other day about like, I was like, oh, maybe I should start selling my feet pictures. And I was like, what if, my friend obviously was like, what if you also put like toenail clippings in there? You probably make more money. That
you would.
Yeah. And that was the thing. I was like, oh, well, if people are buying like, bath water online, which they are genuinely doing, then to think that, very rich men out there are buying a box of a woman's butt cheeks or her hand with her underwear, it doesn't feel that far removed from the world that we are living in. So, I mean, I hope it doesn't exist, but it does. It feels like it exists.
And it's the kind of, again, going back to the really good casting of Sebastian Stan, because he's got this kind of super clean cut. Like, he looks like the ultimate kind of privileged white boy, I suppose, in a way, doesn't he? I suppose in the same way that like Patrick Bateman in American Psycho does, like this really, sort of upper middle class entitled boy that just thinks he can do anything basically and treat anyone however he wants, I suppose. And like, again, it kind of really kind of pushes that, especially in the second half, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it reminded me a little bit, I mean, slightly different, I guess, in kind of their motives, but it reminded me as well of something like Hannibal, the fact that he's also, very affluent. It's strange to think that something like cannibalism almost has this connotation that it is for the rich, for sophisticated people with a with a palate for tasting the ultimate kind of meat. It's like you've got a lot of films that portray it as down and dirty, and if you think of like zombies, it's it's very gross and disgusting, whereas then you've got these upper class cannibals where actually it's a far more civilized, maybe not the word, but it's portrayed that it's a civilized thing. And at the time, just before I watched Fresh, I just finished reading a book called Tender is the Flesh, which is an amazing, very messed up book all about if like a dystopian future where instead of eating animals, we eat just human flesh and we produce them exactly as animals. And obviously it's all about the best meat. You have to be wealthy. Poor people don't have good meat. They have the offcuts, whereas the wealthy people get to eat, and they also get to select what skin color they want, what, defects or non-defects they want, how they want them bred, if they're organic, which, thinking about that, and then this film Fresh, feels like cannibalism, like you said, becomes something about class, which is, it's a bit of a mad concept, but it doesn't feel too far from how it would be.
Yeah, you're so right about that. And it kind of works as a perfect metaphor either way, doesn't it? For sort of the rich consuming the poor and that kind of thing, I suppose. And you're right, the way it's changed over the years, because it used to be that, cannibals in films were like, Leatherface and his family, or Cannibal Holocaust, right? These people that lived on like the margins or the fringes of sort of civilized society. And then maybe it was Hannibal, or like around that time it started to, become more subverted and in a way more believable, that you probably, look at, what's his face? Armie Hammer. And everything that came about with that. I was really tempted to ask Mimi Cave about Armie Hammer, but then I chickened out because I was like, what will she say about it? But I've already seen people making jokes on Twitter being like, I should have cast Armie Hammer in that role rather than Sebastian Stan.
The Armie Hammer thing is, I still can't wrap my head around it. It still blows my mind. But yeah, it would have been an interesting casting choice. Might have been a little bit controversial, just a tad.
My God. But it is like that that kind of high society thing as well about it, because one of the things that it had, along with like I used to get this when I watched Hannibal the TV show, is that I was like, it does look delicious what they're eating,
right?
It's kind of gross, but really enticing at the same time. And that in itself makes you feel a bit uncomfortable, doesn't it? But it like dresses it up as this like really delicious looking gourmet meal whenever they eat the flesh,
I think that's a lot of like what it's trying to kind of portray throughout all of those is like, so many of us are meat eaters, and we're there and we're eating this, meat of an animal. And it's like, well, how far really is it off of that? And like when I was reading the book, it was like, if you were forced into that situation, would you would you know the difference if someone put a plate of, like in Hannibal again, they eat, they're eating their friends and family sometime, and they've got no idea, because I don't think a lot of us would be able to tell the difference, which is quite a scary reality. And then you kind of go, actually, maybe I should just be a vegan, just to rule out the possibility that you're biting into it going, could be someone, couldn't it?
And cannibalism is still considered one of the most taboo topics, I think, isn't it? Even in the horror genre, it's still the stuff that people really recoil at and find really gross. It's really interesting, that, isn't it? Why do you think that is? Why of all the topics that horror and extreme cinema, deals with, why is cannibalism one that really gets to us more than any others?
It's, going back to the whole kind of topic about like extreme films, you think of some of the most extreme ones that talk about like serial killers, for instance. The thing that really gets to people, one, I would say, is like necrophilia, of course, but the other one I always find that people always come back to is cannibalism. The thought of it is so, if you think of like so many kind of serial killers like Jeffrey Dahmer, for instance, he committed horrible crimes, but if you listen to the podcasts or the shows, they always go back to that point of like, but he ate their bodies, he ate parts of them. And it's that where people just cannot seem to get their minds around. And of course, but I think again, it's just because it feels so close to home, because it's like, it's all about, that visceral experience. And maybe if you're like a vegan, you might feel a little bit less away from it, because you go, do you know what, I'm not even in that world near me. But I think, especially me as a meat eater, I do sometimes think about, I'm like, it does kind of make you feel a bit. And I think the other thing for me about like cannibalism, and probably ties into films like Raw or Trouble Every Day, and kind of ties back to the dating scene, is how, you know, in a lot of these films, if you think about like sexuality, we're almost kind of carnivores and got that animalistic nature. You know, you bite people, you kiss them, you taste their flesh. And I think a lot of it is to do with that kind of like carnal desire, and that, like, you know, I'm sure people have sex and they bite until they're bleeding. You know, you kind of get into that frenzy, and you're almost crossing the lines into a weird world, which, you know, in Raw do that perfectly, show that that's kind of what it's about, which I think again makes people go, oh, it just all feels a bit
much,
too much there.
Exactly. Let me ask you about the final act of this film then. You know, all throughout this abduction story, we've got Noah's friend who's trying to track her down. She ends up getting captured herself, so the two of them are in this house together. There's this kind of whole escape scene. There's another prisoner that gets involved as well, and you end up with these three women versus Sebastian Stan in this big kind of gory showdown. What did you think of the way that this film ultimately kind of culminates?
I think I was a little bit disappointed that the friend ended up getting captured as well, because I was like, I think that would, out of the entire film, that's probably the only bit where I was like, I just feel like she didn't need to be. However, at the same time, like, I liked the fact that that guy from the bar did turn up and see that was a creepy ass house, middle of nowhere, and went, fuck that. Because I was like, that is a smart move, because that's what so many people in horror films should do, and just go, nah, I'm good, I'm going home. And they leave it, and yes, all right, you haven't been a hero, but sometimes you haven't got to be a hero in these films. I do like that the friend is a smart friend, and she looks up, you know, she's looking out for her friend the whole way through. She does go and find the wife. She does go and, you know, track down the friend. Like, she never gives up, which I did really like. I did like that the three women kind of come together. I think for me, it showed something around kind of that dating element, that you can be, you know, dating one person. And I think what often happens when dating, or when you find out like another girl is dating the same guy as you, or they've got a wife, etc., I think it's so easy as women to go against one another and hate the other women, because rather than hating the man that's at the center of it, which I think in this we see, you know, the wife obviously kind of becomes that hateful, vengeful character, which, you know, I don't blame her. Like, she's not having a good time herself. She's been put through the shit by dating him, but she could have made the right decisions, stood by the other women that he had wronged. So I quite like the fact that the three women came together and all together, you know, brought him down. I did feel like the fight scene was a little bit clunky. And that, for me, I was like, can we just stat? So I've got this thing in horror films. I'm like, if someone's lying on the floor and unconscious, just chop off their head or stab them in the heart. Like, just make sure it's done and dusted. So that was kind of my only other gripe, I think.
It definitely goes into more genre territory towards the end, doesn't it? I think that's what I found really interesting about the film structurally, is the way it leans further and further into kind of classic genre. You're right. I mean, I think it does push it into more kind of silly territory when they're all stabbing and shooting and kicking the shit out of each other. But I found that so cathartic and so fun and enjoyable. I felt like I kind of needed that. And it felt like the film still made its point. You know, this is something, again, comparing it to Get Out, it's that genius thing that Get Out did, of course, isn't it? Where after Daniel Kaluuya has killed all of these horrible white racist people, suddenly we see police sirens turn up and we go, oh my God, this is it. This is how it's going to end. He's going to go to prison. And it doesn't give you that. It then subverts it and gives you that really fun, oh, it's his mate. But it still makes that point. It still makes you think about that when you see those blue lights. And I think this film does the same. It still lands its point about white men and the way they treat women and how often women don't get the happy ending. But this film still gives you that happy, cathartic ending. And I kind of loved that.
Yeah, and I think as horror fans, I think, we watch so much depressing shit where we do go, oh, it's never going to end well. And most of the time it doesn't. I think actually, as horror fans, that sometimes it's quite nice to go, oh, no, I got that ending that I did actually really want to see. And I think, there were, like you said, like the points were made, and you've kind of got, I think for me, towards the end, you've got, when Noah's friend says to her, he was married, and they both and she turns around and, you think he's tortured her, he's taken body parts, cannibalism, and she still turns around surprised and goes, he was married. And it's like, out of all the things, that was one of the things that shocked her the most, which I loved that point that, it is things like that where you go, he was married, and then you've kind of got that closing scene, haven't you, on the text message that pops up, that to me just when that really drove the point home, and I went, happy ending, but still a slight little dark twist.
Still in dating hell, basically. Because it's Chad, isn't it, being like, you up. It's so good.
And it's like, after all they've been through, you still get that message of a booty call at the end of the night.
So good. And you just leave with a smile on your face after that film ends, don't you? Despite all the dark places it goes to. It's genius. I loved it. Well, there you go. Well, it's out this weekend in the UK. Hopefully everyone out there is going to be able to see it. I can't wait to hear what people think of it. But Zoe, by the sounds of it, you're a big fan. You would recommend this to everyone?
Absolutely, yeah. And I can't wait to watch it again myself. It's definitely gone straight up into that list of favourites for this year and maybe the last few years, to be honest.
Amazing. That's so good. Well, Zoe, thank you so much for joining me to discuss this movie. It's been a pleasure. And I, as ever, I should have expected this, but we got into all kinds of fucked up topics. So that's why I get you on here.
You asked me to cover a film about cannibalism. We're going to get dark.
It's going to get dark, exactly. I loved it. And just remind people where they can find you and more of your work out there online.
Of course. I'm at Zobo with a shotgun on podcast, YouTube, all of the social media channels. And then the other place that you can find me and all of our fabulous writers as well is Ghouls Magazine. So do make sure you follow us on all of the social channels as well.
Perfect. Zoe, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike.
A big thank you to the brilliant Zoe Rose Smith. What a treat. Well, there you go. Fresh is out on Disney Plus in the UK from the 18th of March. Cannot wait to hear what you will think of it. Meanwhile, we've got another very exciting horror movie out in cinemas from the 18th of March. And that's the new Ty West film, X. Oh my God, this film was so much fun. So, for the rest of this episode, we are going to be talking about X. In a bit, you will hear my interview with Ty West. But first of all, let's share our spoiler-free thoughts about the film. Joining me to discuss all things X, he is a long-term friend of this pod, a very good friend of mine, and of course, host of the brilliant Brain Rot podcast. It's Stevie Webb. Hello, Stevie.
Well, hi there. I've come to fix your plumbing.
How are you?
I'm really well. I'm very well, thank you very much.
Good.
And can't wait to talk about what we're about to talk about. Thank you for inviting me to the screening.
Oh my God, what a joy it was to go and see this in a screening.
And watch porn together.
And watch porn together.
To watch porn with you, Mike.
I know, and it's so funny. I always find it so funny watching really sexually explicit films in not just like cinemas, but press screenings, where there's like, you look around and you're like, oh, there's, Peter Bradshaw from the Guardian. There's Mark Kermode. Yeah. Kim Newman, and they're all there, and everyone's just sitting there very uncomfortably in like a very small screening room.
And you're very careful during those moments to not even move or cough or make any sort of, because you worry that if you make some sort of movement, someone will think that perhaps he's turned on and he's trying to cover.
Yes, I've not got a boner.
Freezes.
So before we get into the film itself, let me just quickly ask you about Ty West and his work in general. It's been a while, right? I think it's been about 6 years since we last got a feature film from Ty West, and it's now been over a decade since some of his biggies like House of the Devil and stuff, right? But are you a fan of Ty West and his work?
I am. I haven't seen, is it The Sacrament, which I think was his last proper feature, but The Innkeepers and House of the Devil, I really, really like it, and I think it's I think he's kind of an acquired taste, actually, because I think he's a modern master in terms of building tension and creating a palpable atmosphere, because he really takes his time building it. I recently rewatched The Innkeepers, and that has that gradual mounting unease. And the thing is, obviously it has to pay off, otherwise it's not worth it. But it does with him. I think he's got a wonderful. He's got a wonderful way of working like that.
I agree. There's something specifically, and I spoke to him about this as well, but there's something specifically about his pacing that makes him quite unique, I think. I remember when I first watched House of the Devil, and I was like, this is good, but when is something going to happen, And you've got to be ready for that, haven't you, I think? But his films have such a vibe about them, and I tend to really like the characters as well. Like, I remember one of the things I loved about The Innkeepers was those two friends that worked at that hotel together, and just spending time with them. And it was kind of the same with the characters in House of the Devil as well. So I think he, like you say, he does a good job, even though it's quite slow. I find his films really engaging, and then they really pay off at the end as well.
Yeah, exactly. The third act makes it all worth it. And you're right about his characters, because it feels like he doesn't have to explain anyone's relationship because it's already formed and we're looking in on it, So they may have, fun little things they do, or little traditions they do with each other, and they never explain where that came from. It's just there. It just happens. Especially, like we said in The Innkeepers, they have this relationship that you have to catch up with, rather than watch unfold in front of you.
So it was. We were both quite excited, right, for this new film X, and it feels like I can just tell from speaking to people and from social media, and people are very excited about X. I think Ty West has got so many fans, but also maybe just if you've seen trailers, which I hadn't, but I think a lot of people obviously have, and I think it's got a kind of vibe and a sort of story that maybe people are really up for right now, and maybe we don't get so much of these days, right, as well, which is quite nice.
I mean, it's not sugar-coated, that's for sure, and it fucking goes there. And also it touches on some taboo issues as well, some taboo subjects.
Yes.
And also it fucks with your moral compass a bit, because I'm not going into spoiler territory, but also it makes you wonder, oh no, wait, why do I think that's disgusting? Why do I think that's disgusting? It shouldn't be disgusting. It's very uncomfortable, but in the most wonderful way. And I was so ready for it, because it's a proper original concept horror film, unlike one we've ever seen, actually. Mixing these sort of the two genres of porn and horror in such a way is really wonderful, and I loved it.
I loved it too. So give us a very brief, kind of spoiler-free, if you can, plot synopsis, Stevie.
Oh no, you wicked wench.
I know.
So a group of young wannabe filmmakers want to achieve the American dream, I guess, and this is on the verge of the massive home video explosion, Betamax and VHS. And so after the success of films such as Deep Throat and Debbie Does Dallas, one guy, producer and director, wants to create a porn film to make all the money in the world and the American dream. And so he finds a remote boarding house back out in the boondocks in Texas, which is a little sort of annex, or a little house detached from this old secluded recluse couple, and they don't know that they're actually going to be filming a porn film. And then when they find out, things take a little turn for the worse, and then the sort of moral of the story, I suppose, is about how youth is wasted on the young, and don't flaunt your sexuality in front of those who maybe aren't so mobile anymore.
That was an excellent synopsis. So let me ask you, we won't spend too long in spoiler-free territory, but just let me ask you generally, what did you think of it?
I really did love it, and it felt like a breath of fresh air, and I can't wait to see it again, because there's a lot to take in, which is almost ironic considering actually the premise is super simple. But for me, any film that starts with a police deputy at a crime scene saying to a sheriff, you need to come see this, that's like a win for me. I'm like, okay, I know what we're in for. And obviously it pays homage to those independent 70s boondocks outback horror, specifically Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I mean, there was one shot in particular that I think you and I both made this knowing chuckle
Yes.
in unison, which was fantastic. But West, he's completely in his right to homage those, because he does have that same knack that Hooper had in earning that slow ramp up. If you're going to ask the audience to be patient, then got to deliver the goods, and it really does. And also something I really enjoyed about it was the humor, because he nails that, and that's always make for break for me in a horror. If there's comedy in it, it has to be right. And I think he's honed his humor in this film, because for me, that's the one thing I guess about the Innkeepers that didn't quite, it was just slightly off for me. It was a bit too goofy at times, but the humor in X is pretty nuanced and perfectly pitched, I think.
Completely agree. I loved it so much, more than I was even expecting to be honest. And it felt quite naughty. It felt quite trashy. It felt like there was stuff here where I thought, is this all right? Is this all right? But also at the same time, I was kind of happy to just switch my brain off and just have the best time with it, and I really did enjoy it. And I think Ty West clearly is such a good filmmaker. Like, he just is. And I think you're right. There are so many shots and set pieces and scenes where you think, oh, I know this. Oh, he's deliberately paying homage to, oh, okay, it's Texas Chainsaw. Oh, okay, it's Psycho. Or okay, or whatever. Yeah. But then he also kept taking me by surprise all the time. And I really felt like, I remember having this with House of the Devil as well, where I was like, what film am I in? Like, where is this going? What is going to happen next? And I couldn't predict it. And I was just gripped from beginning to end for that reason. It's so nice to really feel that, isn't it? That experience of like, I don't know what I'm in for kind of thing.
Which is an exciting, you don't get that often anymore. It's an excited anticipation, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, this, I can feel something is going on here, and I don't know what it is, and I cannot wait to find out what the fuck is happening.
Exactly. It's so good. How do you find it in comparison to, for example, House of the Devil and the Innkeepers?
I think he's great at placing films, because in this, you can feel the heat. Some of the camera setups are sort of jaw-dropping, and you can there's these wide, vast shots that really depict the isolation and how off the beaten track we are. And the thing is, with, say, the Innkeepers, House of the Devil, and this, you go, wow, they are so Ty West, but they are all individually so different tonally, and it feels like a complete world that he's pulled you into. And each one, I feel, you feel very voyeuristic. I always feel like we are looking in on a situation, like an isolated situation, and it's really difficult to pull that off, I think, in filmmaking, to make you feel like you are in the world that they are also in. And for that, I commend him for that. I think it's incredible. Yeah,
you're so right. Such a sense of place, right, in all of his films, I think. Yeah, I really love that. And I love the sound, like, choice of music, and everything kind of really engrossed me in this. And it does feel like... and I talk about this a little bit with Ty West about, horror has changed since he was starting out, right, in the late 2000s. Yeah. We've talked together a lot about how different horror was in the mid to late 2000s compared to now. And it does feel like, for better or worse, Ty West has completely... It's like this could have been made in 2010 or 2008 or something. Like, it doesn't feel like... he has responded to the change in horror climate, for better or worse, right? This feels very similar to what he was doing 10 years ago. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but I just think that's interesting.
I think especially with the violence and the gore in this, because that really takes you by surprise, because obviously... when you set something up that feels very Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it sort of lulls you into a false state of security, because obviously in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's not gory, and I think automatically my brain goes into that place. But then the gore in this, there's been a lot of talk recently about, with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre reboot, and how it feels very much like we're going into that early 2000s, not torture porn, but massive gross out gore and killings, and there's a lot of that in this. I mean, it's over the top. I mean, when someone gets stabbed in the neck, they don't get stabbed once, they get stabbed 43 times to the point where there's just a mound of broken flesh, you know, and I love that.
Yeah.
Because, and I mean, if we're still in spoiler free, you know, and especially who's doing that and why,
Yes.
It's really effective, and it doesn't feel like it's pure violence to make you go, oh God, it gets under your skin. There's something, it's fantastically unsettling.
I completely agree. Loved it. I like you said, I already can't wait to see it again. Actually, like I think I'm gonna.
Yeah.
I want to watch it with other people. I want to see what other people think of it. I think I'm gonna go back and buy a ticket to go see it in the cinema again next week. You know, I'm really excited.
Yeah, that's the thing as well. I can't call it when I think of my sort of core group of horror friends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can't call it if they're going to like it or if they're not going to like it, because, and that's, I mean, personally, I think that's the mark of a great film.
Yes.
Is when it can be polarizing, or you can't go, oh, this so-and-so would love this, because it sits in a place that I've not really experienced before. I can't call it. I can't say exactly what this film is.
Completely agree. And that's why I think we should refrain from saying any more until we get into spoilers, right? So we will leave the spoiler-free discussion at that. Now let's head over to my interview with Ty West himself to hear what he had to say about X. I'm very excited to welcome to the podcast Ty West. Hello, Ty. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Really good, thank you. Really good. I mean, it's great to have you back in the horror genre, directing a feature film. You know, your last feature film, Ty, was In a Valley of Violence, right? Which was 2016, 6 years ago. How come it's been so long?
I had made 7 of them in a row, but you run the risk of just sort of repeating yourself, and making a movie is kind of 2 years of trauma. So to do that over something that you're not particularly inspired by is just a little too masochistic for me. I took a break for a while, and I don't know if I thought I was done forever, but I just wasn't thinking about horror movies because I had spent, 10 to 15 years exclusively thinking about horror movies one after another. And then, I don't know, I started thinking horror movies got a little soft, and I had never made a slasher movie. And I have an idea that fell into that category because that seemed appealing, like right now. And it just slowly started, the snowball started rolling. And next thing you know, here I am talking to you.
Interesting. I was going to ask you a bit about, the changes in the horror genre that you'd seen since the days of, making things like House of the Devil, 10 plus years ago now. You mentioned that you think horror's gone soft.
Yes, but that's neither good nor bad, nor does that have anything to do with, there's always been trends. There always will be trends in horror. So there was a period where it was everyone called it torture porn, in the mid 2000s, where you were just my God, all there was people getting ripped apart. That's not what's happening now. There was a period where everybody, maybe this is a little bit now, where there's always a ghost standing in the other room in the shadows that you don't quite see. And then it's there. This seems to be that time. There was a found footage time, this is just what happens. But it occurred to me, I was directing television, and I was thinking about how come I haven't been that excited about a horror movie? And that's not to say there haven't been greats. I mean, Ari Aster appears. I mean, I think Raw is an incredible movie. There's plenty of great horror movies, but on a whole, there's something about corporations getting involved in horror that takes it from being a kind of outsider genre into a more mainstream genre. And in doing so, you lose a little bit of that edge. So I just been thinking about, that was something I always liked growing up about movies, that they were a little bit dangerous. And there was always kind of an odd, symbiotic relationship between horror and porn, because they were the sort of the genres that were outside of the studio filmmaking. And I found that was interesting to me. And slasher movies were historically a lowbrow sex and violence kind of thing. And then I was thinking of I wanted to make a movie about filmmaking. So, I didn't want to make a movie about making a horror movie because that's too meta for my taste. But that's why I was well, then maybe making a movie about adult filmmaking is a way in for the audience to start thinking about filmmaking.
That's really interesting. And of course, your film does, in a really interesting way, compare and draw comparisons and parallels between horror films and porn films, right? And I guess in a lot of ways, they are similar, particularly in their reputation, right?
They do. And particularly in the 70s, they did. And something to note about adult filmmaking in the 70s versus today is you still had to make the rest of the movie then.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So if you were making it needed to be theatrical length to go into a theater. It had to have a story. It wasn't like it is today. And so And people who were making it, sometimes were making it just to make a quick buck in it. And sometimes they were doing it to sort of like begin their filmmaking career, which in the case of X is what RJ is doing. Is there's an opportunity for him. It is not the ideal opportunity. He has goals that are more ambitious than, say, this Farmer's Daughter movie he's making, but he's still trying to make whatever the ceiling is of the movie he's making. He's at least aiming for that ceiling. And that was just hopefully to like let people in, when you see something on screen that they're making seem erotic, but when you see them making it, it's ridiculous, to think about the process of filmmaking. Because I'm often asked, like, when you make a horror movie, is it scary on set? And the answer is obviously no. Mm-hmm. But then it occurred to me that like that's not actually obvious to anyone who doesn't make movies. And so this is kind of a way to sort of bring them inside a little bit. Because I thought if you could see what was going into these people making this movie, think about what's going into the movie that I'm making, and you might sort of get a little extra appreciation out of some of the craft that's in the movie and things like that. And if people could walk away from this movie being like having a good time with all the horror elements, but also feeling like there's some like cinema to talk about, like that to me is like, because I have a real reverence for the craft of cinema. So I hope that people leave this movie being like, like movies themselves are cool.
They really are. I've got such a love for horror or just films about filmmaking in general, right? And movies that really are love letters to cinema itself. And this film really felt like that, even in its references, right? Or its homages or its nods. I saw, of course, nods towards films like Texas Chainsaw and Psycho and Friday the 13th. Also, there's a little bit of things like Bay of Bloods, even Twitch of the Death Nerve, right? And some various other sort of cinema from the 70s. Were you kind of deliberately dropping those sort of Easter eggs in there, for people to spot? Or is that just kind of ingrained in you and your sensibility in your filmmaking?
It's a little bit of both, but I think mostly with this movie, when you make a slasher movie, like when you make any sort of genre movie, you're going to have like movies that came before you that are like in many cases great films that came before you that will loom over the movie, whether you want them to or not. Mm-hmm. And you could either try to like stick your middle finger up to that and try to, but I just feel like, look, there's a lot of people that are going to think this movie is going to be like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I don't think that it is. I think anyone that's seen the movie doesn't think it is either. Yeah. But I'm very aware that people are going to go in with expectations that that's what it is. So I figured like, well, let them think that. And at some point in the movie, you're going to have a moment that you realize it's not that. And since I was thinking it was that, I'm now unsure where it's going. And for me, that's great because now I kind of got you to actually go, I don't know where this movie's going. And that was a real driving force is to kind of get people thinking like, oh, it must be a movie like this other movie. And then at some point you realize you may have been wrong in your assumptions. And then the rest of the movie should just be a totally suspenseful wild ride at that point.
Oh, I love it. It worked so well on me, actually. I went into it completely blind. I hadn't even watched a trailer. I hadn't read a synopsis. I did not know what genre or subgenre I was getting myself into. And it kept me guessing all the way, especially throughout that whole first, maybe 45 minutes before it kind of reveals its hand. And that's something that you've done a lot in the past, right? I think, when we think of Ty West movies, we might think of The Innkeepers or, of course, House of the Devil. And these were movies that really took their time. They were very deliberately paced. Is that something that you always kind of deliberately go for? You kind of leave us in suspense for quite a sustained amount of time, I suppose, before the horror kicks in.
Yeah, I don't think about it that much. I mean, I'm self-aware enough to know that people say slow burn and all these sorts of things. But really for me, it's like I watch movies the way I watch movies, and I kind of make movies the only way I know how to make movies. And I need to get invested in the people and the place and the vibe of the movie and the geography of the movie enough to where I feel like I know where everything is and who everybody is. And then I have the bandwidth for what comes next. And when a movie gets ahead of me with that, I just struggle with it. So my own taste is basically to be like, well, I want you to get to know all these people. I want you to get to know the place where they're at. I want you to know where everything is, because the movie that you came to see is going to show up. It's going to show up in a big way. But I want you to know where everything is and who everybody is. So when it shows up, you're not like just lost in the chaos of it. And so for me, that's just about kind of embedding you in the story and in the place. And I wanted you to be charmed and endeared to all these characters. So that way, one knock historically on slasher movies is that there's like unlikable characters that you're just waiting to die. And hopefully in this movie, you actually don't want them to die. A thought of them dying is actually quite confusing because they seem to be the entire story of the movie. And if they die, well, what would happen next?
Ty, I've got to ask you, What is it that's so frightening to you about old bodies, old women's bodies in particular, that kind of is used, and that, you know, there has been a tradition of this, particularly recently, it feels like, in horror. Why is it that is being used to scare people? And if it does scare us, what is it about that scares us?
I don't know. I suppose some of that's subjective. I mean, plenty of old people are very nice and lovely people, not necessarily the ones in this movie. But I think that, you know, existentially, everybody has to deal with getting older. Some people do it more gracefully than others. Some people mature into it more gracefully than others. And some people hold a lot of resentment. In a movie where there are young people who are very much of a different era, kind of literally stomping across your front yard, that's a lot to take in for the characters in this movie. And I think that, you know, there's a certain commodity and there's a certain element that society reserves for the youth that they don't as much for people when they're older. I don't know if that's good or bad, just seems to be the case. And, you know, people will deal with that differently. In the case of this movie, they deal with it like rather poorly.
Really excitingly, I read today that you have been working on a prequel for this movie. Is that right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. So we went to New Zealand to make this movie because at the time, New Zealand had 0 COVID cases. And this is, as you can expect, not a very social distance kind of movie. So we went down there because it was a safe place to make the movie and to make the movie in the sort of traditional sense of filmmaking. But you had to do 2 weeks in a hotel room before you could get into the country, which is how they sort of kept COVID out of the country. 2 weeks in a little room is a long time. So I had an idea for a bigger story for this, I don't know, universe, if you will. And I thought, well, I have 2 weeks. I'm bored out of my mind. I'm going to write this idea. And if it's good, maybe I can convince A24 that we should just stay here and make 2 movies in a row. And I would FaceTime with Goth to sort of collaborate on that. And we wrote this script. And I mean, all credit to A24, and why there's such an amazing people to work with is they read the script and they were like, this is a great idea. And so we shot both movies back to back.
This is very exciting. Well, having now watched X and loved it, I already cannot wait for the prequel. Ty West, thank you so much for joining me.
Cool. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And there we go. A big thank you to the brilliant Ty West. All right, Stevie, let's get into spoilers because there's so much to discuss with this movie. I guess the first thing I want to ask you is, which, I mean, I would consider this a spoiler because I didn't know this was going to be the case, but this is a slasher film, right? It's revealed, more than halfway into the film when the actual horror starts, that we are watching a slasher film, and a gory one at that, right? As this old couple, particularly this old naked lady, is slicing her way through these victims one by one. We've talked about this a lot recently, but we are definitely smack bang in the middle of a slasher resurgence, right? We've had already Scream 5 this year. We've had Texas Chainsaw, and this was, I think, this is a proper slasher, right?
Yes, it really is. But you don't know it's going there because obviously our antagonist, our main antagonist being Pearl, the old lady, you know, we first see her in a window and it's a bit ethereal, and then, you know, we see her silhouette in the woods, and you know, then it's very gradual, you know, when she takes Maxine into the house for their secret little glass of lemonade. It's only when she says, I used to be beautiful too, you know, she tells her, it doesn't last. And that is when the hairs began to stand up on the back of my neck. And I was like, ooh, just from that sentence, you gather that there's a tension, there's an envy at play, and that envy doesn't feel safe. But with the danger of that envy, there's also a genuine sadness, I think, almost a moving portrayal of the desire for youth. And it's not just that, obviously, she doesn't turn into this psycho slasher just because that's who she is inherently. It's a fury and it's an envy that they're all young and carefree and sexually acrobatic. And not only that, but they're filming it to show to others. They're exploiting their own youth and sexual mobility and taking it for granted, I suppose. And that's what sets her off. And then that first time we see her kill the guy in front of the truck with the knife in the neck, it's just horrific, and it is so visceral, and the squelching and the noise and the fury in her sort of grunt is something I will never forget.
It's just wonderful, isn't it? And it really kind of lets that moment simmer. And even up until that moment in that set piece when he's in the car, it takes its time for so long. And you're just exactly. And you're just going, something's coming. But I was still like, who's it going to be? Is it going to be the husband that's going to the old man that's the killer? Is it going to be the wife? Is it going to be the two of them together? At one point, I was like, is this going to be a killer crocodile movie? Like, I really didn't know. And I loved, like, it felt like there was just danger lurking around every corner in this film, you know?
You're so right, because they've clearly set it up that she is no way mobile enough to be a psycho killer. I mean, and there are some logistical questions throughout it, of like, how have they done this, or how have they hung someone up when they can barely lift themselves up? But that aside, and it's that moment, as you say, in the truck, you know, you always know when a character is on their own, when they start talking to themselves, you know they're in for it. They're dead. When it's like, what's going on here? Let me get out and check. You know, when they start talking to themselves, they're fucked.
Yes.
So you know that's coming. And you can see that, you know, Ty West, he doesn't hide the fact that she's got something behind her back. You can see clearly she's got one arm behind her back and one down. So you're like, it's about to happen. Something's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And it happens in the way that you really don't expect. And then when she straddles him in a sexual position and then starts stabbing his throat 40 times, I was screaming with happiness inside because it was exactly what I wanted. And it's just, do you know what as well? What's so creepy about, I kind of, well, if we're talking now, and this is for people who have seen it, I kind of guessed, where you can see that Pearl isn't actually a 96-year-old woman. There's either an old woman heavily made up.
Yes.
But I caught at one point, I thought, I recognise her eyes. And I realised it was Mia Goth. So she's playing both parts.
Right. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Is it Mia? Is that her name, Mia Goth?
Because I was really... Yeah, Mia Goth. I was really confused by various things I've read and conversations I've had because... Ty West is making a prequel to this, which we'll maybe talk about in a bit, right?
Right.
And it's called Pearl, and it's about the character of Pearl, but it's starring Mia Goth. And so I figured Pearl was that character that Mia Goth plays, i.e. the final girl. But it's not. Right. It's the story of the old lady, played by Mia Goth. So that's hilarious.
So I reckon, it's going to be Pearl when she was Mia Goth's age, maybe, or younger. I don't know. But and then it clicked that it's Mia Goth. And I've done a little look on the internet. One other person has said it that I've found, but I am convinced it's her. And I think that's why there's that brilliant connection and why she's obsessed with her, because it literally is the young version of her. And that's why she wants it and misses it, which is so clever.
I love it.
And it's not listed on IMDb. You know, it doesn't say who plays Pearl.
No.
And so when that clicked for me, I was like, oh, that is absolutely perfect.
You're absolutely spot on there. That makes a lot of sense, because Mia Goth is definitely starring in the prequel called Pearl, so that must be the case. There you go. I love it. So how do we feel about this? And I obviously acknowledging that we are two blokes talking about this, right? But
yes,
the serial killer, our slasher killer, is this basically horny old lady, right? Who is essentially had enough of life. Her husband won't have sex with her because he's got a bad heart. She misses being young and beautiful. That's what she keeps saying, like she misses being in her youth. And she sort of wanders around semi-naked / naked through most of the film, right? Either coming on to various men and or killing them, essentially. How do you feel about that in general and the portrayal of this character?
Well, this is what I meant about the moral compass thing, because the actual sex scene as well, when we have the sex scene with the older couple, and it made my compass spin, because why shouldn't they be allowed to shag? Why do we automatically go to disgust or think they're too old to be engaging in such salacious acts?
Yeah.
And I suppose what it is that as a society, we herald old people as the comforting caregivers, the pocket money giving, warm suit making wise ones.
Yes.
And for most of us, the first and most important old people in our lives would be our grandparents. And, they set the personal benchmark in your head of how old people should be and should behave. And so to fuck with that and make them insatiably lustful or murderous on top of that really fucks with your child brain. And so it put me in a very strange position where I was questioning my reaction to this.
Yes.
And that's obviously very deliberate. And, you know, Ty West is definitely, he has a thing for old naked people, because every time it makes me question. Even in The Innkeepers, you know, there's the ghost of the guy, the old man from the bath, and it makes you go, oh God, old person naked. And actually you're like, why?
Yes.
Why shouldn't they be? What age is the cutoff for when you have to stop that?
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with you, and it is a trope that I've heard criticised before, that old people, old bodies, particularly female old bodies, are portrayed as monstrous in horror. Yeah. I'm thinking of stuff even for like Drag Me to Hell is a really a big example, isn't it, of the old crone, and then even recent movies like Hereditary, and you know there are elements of that as well, and it definitely is a kind of well-worn trope. I think that this movie is doing something interesting with it, though, because she is a character. Like, she is a character who you genuinely feel for and can kind of sympathise with, and also... it's whether or not, it's really difficult to know, and this is why I'm keen to see it again, and I'm keen to discuss it with other people. But you're right, that scene with the two old people having sex, was that purely played to be like, gross and hilarious, or was it not? And I couldn't really tell, because like you say, I was kind of reacting to it, questioning my own reaction and thinking, how should I be reacting to this, you know?
I want to, you know, give Ty the benefit of the doubt and say it's in there, and it goes on for so long deliberately to make you question that, make you question your own reaction. And I think it's got to be, because, you know, it's portrayed in a way that I think you're meant to go, gross, and then catch yourself. Yes. That's what I personally think, and that's giving the benefit of the doubt. But yeah, I mean, there was a film that I saw at LFF, La Abuela, which it's kind of like Get Out, but with older people, you know, and it's people who want to suck the youth out of younger people and keep themselves alive. You know, that's actually, we've seen that in horror quite a lot, even if in Death Becomes or something, you know, there's always this, the Rejuvenator. There's another 80s film called The Rejuvenator, which is dreadful, but it's about, you know, sucking the Hocus Pocus, you know, sucking the youth from children or kids that don't deserve it or don't appreciate it. And that search, and also just that dismissal of older people, that once you get to a certain age, all you're allowed to be is an old person. Yeah. And that is a subject that comes up a lot, and in horror quite a lot. But yeah, I'm interested to hear what people think of that quite explicit sex scene between two older people. But, you know, it wonderfully rounds it off with the joke, because he's worried that's going to kill him and give him a heart attack, but actually the smallest thing gives him a heart attack
so
later on when she just kind of coughs blood. It's fantastic.
So brilliant.
And also, but all the sex in this, let's talk about the actual filming of the porn, because all this sex in the film is so uncomfortable. And it got me thinking, why is that so uncomfortable to me? Because you and I were sat next to each other, and if it were a film where, say, there was a graphic and passionate sex scene between two main characters, I don't think I really would have batted an eyelid. But there's something about the fact that we are watching porn being made, you know, an act of sex that is for the pleasure of the voyeur rather than the people involved in the sex act, makes it really icky, because porn viewing is, for the most part, a private event. Yes. And watching it with others unwillingly activates this sort of prudish and bashful side of you. It really fucks with my sort of emotions.
Yes, especially as Brits, right? I think, and like we said earlier, being in a critic screening, especially so, even more, I think. But you're right. And what's really interesting about it is that the film, again, is kind of commenting on all that, isn't it? Like, obviously, Ty West, and he spoke about this in the interview, that he was drawing very obvious parallels between horror cinema and porn, right? And he was saying, especially at this point, they kind of had the same reputation, like late 70s, early 80s, this boom of VHS, where every, you know, randomer with a bit of money would go out into the woods with their mates and make either a porn film or a horror film, right? And they were considered these kind of, you know, lower arts, these kind of trash things. And, you know, and this is something I talked about a lot in my slasher series, in some ways, slasher movies and porn movies have a similar trajectory, right? You don't always watch them for the story, for the plot, for the acting. You watch watch them for the money shots. You watch them for those,
penetration.
Yeah, for
whether
the
it's a blade or a penis.
Exactly, the penetration, the blood splat, all of that. And so
they come shot.
Yeah, exactly. They kind of fulfill the same purpose in a weird, perverse way, don't they? I think, and clearly he's drawing comparisons with that. And I think there is something really interesting as well about, you're right, about watching something really porny with an audience, which doesn't exist in this day and age. Obviously, we all have the internet, and but this movie is set in a time where they were on the cusp of that becoming a thing, right? I think there's a line when one of the characters said, "Finally, people will be able to enjoy porn in the privacy of their own home. They won't have to watch it in a cinema anymore." And of course, that was the norm back then as well.
Yeah,
so
you could have 42nd Street and get off. Yeah. Or go and have a little private booth or watching the same screen. It's mental. And and it is that whole thing about the American dream as well, playing on that. And there is a wonderful moment where it's jumping back and forth, isn't it, between a porno and a horror film, and it's literally cut. And is there even a split screen? I can't remember. In my head there is a moment, but and it's that showing us that actually it's the same. It is the same thing, and we're all, especially as you say, going into the home video boom, where it kind of ruined. That ruined horror. We're still recovering. Horror is still recovering from the VHS era in the 80s, when any fucker could film something and put it out. And because of a lot of the stuff I love, but all the trash that was put out, it completely... because we're coming from the 70s, when, some of the horror in the 70s was Oscars,
blockbuster horror.
The Exorcist and Carrie, it was blockbuster horror, Jaws, whatever. And then the 80s ruined that with and as I said, still recovering. and it got lumped in because everything that was being rented out mostly was porn and horror films. Yeah. And so it was still in the recovery of that. And I just, also the thought of renting a porn video, let alone buying, because they used to be able to do that as well, and it's like, who had this before me? Who's going to have this after me?
And it's so good, it's so funny, and you're right, but also there's something, and this is what I really loved about this film, there's something also kind of sweet and endearing about it as well, and that goes for the old couple who are our killers, but also all of our main characters as well. There is, yes, this film is all about blood and death and tits and sex, right? But I genuinely liked and cared for these characters, and I think there's this element to it. This is reminded me a bit of films like Boogie Nights, where these people kind of function almost as this kind of unconventional family, and they're all kind of there for each other, and they're kind of sweet to each other for the most part. And you've got one character, the cameraman, who is genuinely trying to make like the best film he can, like he wants to sort of make a piece of art,
earnest.
Right? Yeah, and that's really funny. And Ty West again kind of drew comparisons to that, where he said, especially back in the day, of course, porn, it's not so much the case anymore with Pornhub or whatever, but porn movies were movies, and they had to have stories, however thin, and they had to have acting and characters.
There's a narrative, yeah, right,
and so people did have to think about that, and people maybe did put effort into that. And it was the same with horror. And no matter how trashy, I mean, we've talked about this so many times, but no matter how trashy those horror films were, a lot of the time these were filmmakers actually wanting to tell a good story or make something interesting or different in some way. And I loved that these characters, you really feel that with these characters, don't you, I think?
Yeah, and also they're very realistic, because you do want them, but they're also, every single one of them is flawed in some way, which makes them so human and so real. And and as we know, even Wes Craven under a pseudonym, he started in porn, and it really, I love that character in this film, because he keeps almost correcting everyone when like saying, no, it's cinema. Yeah. It's cinema, not, this is the difference. This is what's going to make it amazing. But it's not. They're not just making a shag scene. They're trying to do the whole story, and then they keep adding, I've got a sister and I've got another sister.
So funny. It genuinely made me laugh when they'd finished, they'd wrapped on one scene, and the director or the exec producer guy was so happy about it, and he was like, that was art in there, that was art that we made, and and it was a really sweet moment. And then he goes, feel how hard my cock is right now, and just grabs his hand. It was
and he just does it.
So funny. I loved it. And so we've got a really fun group of characters here. We've got a fun cast as well. So we've got, as we've mentioned, Mia Goth. We've also got Jenny Ortega, who just seems to be popping up in absolutely everything right now.
Right, we've just seen her in Scream, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, and Brittany Snow, like all these people. Those three actually, they've all done quite a few sort of horror or genre films, because Mia Goth I loved in A Cure for Wellness that I spoke to you about on an Also Rans episode. And I think, didn't she sort of get her big break in a Lars von Trier? Wasn't it one of the Nymphomaniac films?
Yeah, exactly. That was the first time I saw of her. That was Nymphomaniac. She's such an interesting kind of actress, and she's got such an interesting look and an interesting vibe. She's very watchable.
And she kind of looks 12, which makes it sort of uncomfortable. And and she in everything I've seen her, and I always think, oh, you seem very, very young, but now you're doing these very awful lewd acts. And Brittany Snow, I think she kind of stole it for me in this as Bobby Lynn, as this this porny stripper Southern belle who wants to be, I want to be an actress, and she's moving into the movies, and obviously she's going to start in porn. And I thought she really stole it for me, because she brought a lot of the humour, but she played it. She didn't really send up that ditzy blonde Southern belle. It just felt real. And she was a much needed sort of relief to cut through everything else. I thought it was wonderful.
Yeah, I completely agree. I loved her. She was so good. Every moment she had, she sort of stole. And yeah, you're right. She wasn't just your typical blonde girl in a slasher film, right, as well. Like, she was genuinely interesting. I liked all of them, and it's just like those little wholesome moments, like when they all just sit around with an acoustic guitar and play Fleetwood Mac and stuff, and it's like, what is this? It's so funny.
She starts singing Landslide.
It's so good. And then of course all the characters end up dying in ways that you don't necessarily expect, or in an order you don't necessarily expect. But I think it's the three blokes that all die first, right? I believe. So it's RJ, the cameraman, who gets killed in the truck, and then I think it's Wayne, the exec producer, who gets stabbed in the eye in the barn after stepping on a nail, right?
The nail, that Home Alone moment. That was such a fantastic moment, because it's foreground, isn't it? And it's in focus, this nail.
Loved it.
And you can just see his bare feet coming towards it. Oh, it's horrible. Yeah, but he gets the pitchfork. Oh, that moment actually when Pearl comes back into the barn after she's pitchforked through his eyes, and she just checks he's dead by just gently shoving the pitchfork in his back. It's horrible.
So good. And then the character of Jackson, who I think gets the kind of saddest and most unceremonious ending, because he just gets shot with a shotgun in the swamp by the old man, right? After helping him trying to find his wife. And I was like, oh man, that is harsh. That was a harsh moment, I thought.
That was rough. That was rough. I wasn't expecting that one.
And then Bobby Lynn gets killed by the crocodile, and I was so excited for that moment as well.
Because you just know it's got to happen. This croc or alligator, whatever it would be in the Boondocks.
Chekhov's croc, yeah.
The Chekhov's croc. Because you've got that absolutely beautiful, serene shot where Mia Goth is sort of just floating in the bayou.
Yes.
And it's this aerial bird's eye shot, and it's vast. You can just see water all the way around her and a little bit of the pontoon, and it's there for a while, and you can hear the cicadas, you can feel the heat, you can feel the cool of the water. It's just all working, and you just see a shot of a croc in the reeds, you just see its eye blinking, and then this incredible scene where it just, during that bird's eye view, it just swims into shot as she decides she's going to go back to shore, and it's just coming up behind her. And then the fact that she is completely oblivious and never even knows it was behind her, we know we're going to see that again. It's got to, as you say, Chekhov's croc. And that moment with Brittany Snow, when Pearl just pushes her in, and he was waiting for her, just gets her by the head. Fantastic.
Phenomenal.
Love it.
What a great moment that was. And yeah, I'm with you. That beautiful overhead shot of the crocodile just stalking this victim. It was so good. It was quiet and tense and wonderful. And we should talk, I mean, we've mentioned it already, but we should talk about some of these references too, like these quite overt references, right, to other horror movies. And it does, I think, because it's about filmmaking, it's clearly like, it's like a love letter to filmmaking, isn't it, really, in some ways, this whole film?
Yeah.
But we talked about that shot when both of us kind of gave each other like a kind of knowing nod almost, where somebody is approaching the house. There's a shot from the inside of the house looking through this kind of this transparent door as somebody's knocking on the door looking in, and it is shot for shot Texas Chainsaw Massacre, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah, It's really fantastic, and you get that twice. That just to really nail it home, you get that exact shot twice, and there's angles. There's just so many angles that felt very Hooper, and that were too close to not be deliberate. And because you and I, we have such a fondness for that film. It made me feel nostalgic. It made me feel warm and a little bit fuzzy, even though I know that this could only mean bad news.
Well, in some ways, it felt like more of a Texas Chainsaw movie than Texas Chainsaw 2022
the
did,
recent,
right? Didn't
yes.
it? But again, I think it's really what also made me feel like we were back in the 2000s, because basically every horror film in the 2000s was trying to be Texas Chainsaw Massacre, wasn't it? In some way or another.
Right.
When you look at every film by people like Rob Zombie or whoever else, they were all going for that.
Eli Roth or any of them.
Yeah, even Quentin Tarantino's Death Proof, like they were all going for that kind of 70s grindhouse vibe, weren't they?
The grindhouse thing.
Yeah. So they all had that going, but I loved this vibe, and I also loved, again, it's very overt, it's very on the nose. They talk about Psycho at one point and how that had a kind of bait and switch, and then there's a moment when RJ gets in the shower, and that's the kind of turning point of the film as well, just before all the murders start happening.
That's right, and that's another that aerial shot again. Sorry, I'm going on about the shots a lot, but I just found that so beautiful of him crying in the shower, which was a really touching moment, because his innocent boom mic holding girlfriend said, I want to get fucked on screen, and he just kind of has to let it happen. And there's that beautiful shot of the shower, and and that's how I feel, because we've all cried in the shower, because it just feels great, and you always feel like you're on screen. Like you might do the slight slide down the wall.
One hand on the wall.
One hand on the wall, sliding, and it was one of those perfect shots like that, but also so sad and moving and real, that moment.
Yeah, I loved it. Obviously, there were moments that felt Friday the 13th like to me, when they're swimming in the lake, swimming up to the pier. All of that, I felt, and also Twitch of the Death Nerve, like Bay of Blood too, right?
Bay of Blood.
It had so many vibes of so many great films, and that is, for us horror nerds as well, it's like catnip, isn't it?
Yes, it is, but also done without feeling pastiche or eye-rolly, because there's been a lot of films, I'd say, in the last 5 years where I appreciate it when they're nodding to things, but if it's not done with sincerity, it just makes me feel a bit like, oh, come on, that's cheap. But there's everything in this, like that shot we said, there's something genuine about it. There's something, it's for a reason. It's not just to go, hey, here's a wink to you guys who love that. It builds the atmosphere, and it's completely necessary. There's a reason for it, and so in this, I think it's so perfectly pitched. All those little nods.
Yes, I completely agree. Let's talk about that final act then. How do you think it? Were you kind of satisfied with the conclusion of how it all came to an end, with Maxine kind of escaping by running over the old lady, over Pearl, and like you say, Pearl's husband dying of the heart attack, and everything kind of coming to an end, with the police kind of finding all the bodies in the house at the end and everything.
It's wonderful. That again, it's them finding all the bodies. It's like that. When you hear the radio or whatever of the in Texas Chainsaw, but also just like Pearl with the shotgun and the recoil sending her flying through the screen door and breaking her hip. You hear her go, my hip! Yeah. It's like, oh, God. I loved it. I didn't... it's not what I expected at all. Because also, we don't really know, it's alluded to a couple of times, what it is they want. There's something they do want from these young sexualized kids, because... when I say kids, obviously adults, that sounds dodgy. Because, there's a moment where he says, is this the one? Is she the one? She's like, no, it's the other one. There's something about her. She's got the X Factor, basically. And we never find out there's something they want from her. And it feels like it's not to kill her. They want her for another reason. And it makes me think of some of those occulty 70s films where it is they, have an attic full of sort of an altar where they are going to sacrifice her or take her youth. But obviously there's nothing explicit telling us what it is, but we never really find out what that is, because it's not just pure anger and envy that they're young and they're sex, because he's in on it too.
Yeah.
And I love that it's left we're kind of not sure what the fuck just happened, and neither are the police. Like, I think the very last line when he's like, "What do you think happened?" and he's like, "I have no idea."
So
He's like, I
good.
really don't know.
Yeah,
It's great, and we don't really either.
No, we have no idea what we just watched. Basically, you're so right about
No.
that. What was their plan? Like, and there's that moment when they, the husband kidnaps Jenny Ortega's character, locks her in the basement. In the basement, there was a naked man strung up, right? He's not a man that we had seen. Like, he wasn't one of our main characters, was he? He was somebody else.
I wasn't sure if it was RJ, but then
Well,
I
maybe.
realised it can't have been. No, it can't have been because his neck was destroyed. So originally I thought it was, but because his neck was so stabbed up, you'd never be able to hang him from it.
Right.
So it is something they've done before.
Yes, because there was a car in the swamp too, right?
That's
so
right,
so
yes.
so this is another previous victim, I suppose. And you get the feeling, I don't know, maybe this is just where my mind went, but I thought, was he there as some sort of sex toy for her? You know, like some handsome naked man to sort of play with in the basement? I don't really know.
But she fucked him to death.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
It probably is that because, I mean, he is fully naked, isn't he? You see,
yeah,
you see his pee.
yeah, fully naked and quite ripped and quite good looking, right, as well. And you think maybe
yeah.
she was keeping him for whatever reason.
Yeah, and maybe then this time round she's got the fascination with Mia Goth because obviously he still loves Pearl. He wants to please her, but he's worried about his ticker. So,
Yes.
so he's probably agreed that I'll tell you what, we'll get you sorted. We'll get we'll get you what you need from youth.
Or is it that it is, like you said, some sort of occult thing, and they had found they'd found a guy, and now they'd find the perfect girl, and they were going to somehow steal their body, steal their youth or something.
Yeah, right. That's like in La Abuela, the LFF film that I saw, which is I think I just mentioned that.
Yeah,
but it's about taking your old spirit and putting it into a younger body. But I love that we don't really fucking know, and we can't find out because she gets her head run over and he's had a heart attack.
Yes.
So we're left just like, and she just drives off, doesn't she? Mia got Maxine.
Yeah, Maxine. She just drives off, and that's it.
Leaves the scene of the crime.
Loved it. It's everything you want for like a really fun 90-minute splattery horror film, right? I
was so pleasantly surprised and pleased, and you knew straight away. I think we both did. We sort of sat comfortably within the first 5 minutes, going, "Okay, this is going to be a ride.
Yeah,
let's just go for it."
Yeah, it's so true. So how do we feel about this prequel? So Ty West basically has announced that secretly, because he was filming the first one during COVID, and they were filming it, I believe, in quarantine. I believe it was in New Zealand, right? Yeah. And while they were in New Zealand, they, exactly like you said, they had to quarantine in a hotel room, and he just decided he just bashed out this script for a prequel. And A24 were really into it, and they said, yeah, film them both. And I believe he filmed them both back to back. So
it's filmed. I didn't realise that.
He actually had secretly filmed it, and so it's now in post-production. So it could be coming out like within the next year, potentially. And all we know is it's a prequel, and it's called Pearl. So surely, especially after your observation that, yes, it's Mia Goth playing Pearl, are we going to see her origin story in some way?
Oh my goodness, that's so cool. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because obviously another huge part of the story that we don't get to look into is the preacher on screen, and we find out that Maxine was his daughter, and you've got this whole, Bible Belt shit going on, and it leaves you on that as well. That's one of the last things you see is her face on a TV screen.
Yeah.
And so she's on the run, but my mind's a little bit blown because I'm already so invested in this world, whatever this world is, and so I can't wait for Pearl to see where we're going with that.
I know, I absolutely cannot wait. And Ty West sort of said, whatever you think you're expecting from that film, it is not going to be what you expect, is what he said. He said it's entirely
So it's not going to be a
different.
young nymphomaniac Pearl killing fucking guys to death.
Maybe it's going to turn out to be some sort of supernatural body swapping, body hopping film or something. Who knows?
Something that explains this.
Yeah, exactly. I can't wait. I can't wait. Bring it on. So there you go. So obvious question to end with, but it sounds like this is one that would you recommend this to all sort of horror fans out there?
100%. I don't think we've seen something like this for a really long time, and it's a fuck of a lot of fun. As I said, it's fucking uncomfortable as well, in a really great way. And what more do you want from horror than to elicit several reactions? And it did that for me.
I completely agree. I kind of didn't realise how much I was wanting a film like this back in my life, but like I've seen some amazing stuff recently. I've seen some clever, smart, emotional, nuanced horror movies at various festivals and streaming, but oh my God, I've missed a film like this that is just a really, really well-made, balls-to-the-wall slasher film that will make you laugh and jump and wince and be just like grossed out. And it was just really fun and genuinely quite scary too, we should add, right? I mean, it's got some very creepy moments in it.
100%. I was actually, the first time that you see Pearl in the background of the... it reminds me a little bit of that terrifying moment when... Leonardo DiCaprio first turns up to Shutter Island, and there's that woman in the garden, and he just goes shh, and it's that it just chills right up my spine. I love it. I really can't wait to see it again, genuinely.
Amazing. Well, Stevie, thank you so much. What a pleasure it's been as ever. And just tell people where they can find you and more of your stuff online.
Yeah, well, you can find my podcast, Brain Rot, an 80s horror podcast, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And it's a lot of good fun. Mike, you're on there quite a lot.
Yes.
We've got some fun people on there like Graham Norton and Elijah Wood, etc. And we just talk about those 80s trash VHS films. Not porn, but similar.
Maybe for a future season that can be...
exactly. Why not?
Amazing. Stevie, thank you so much.
Thanks, buddy. Take care.
And that's it for this week's bonus episode. Thank you so much for listening, and a huge thank you to all of my guests: Zobo with a shotgun, Stevie Webb, Mimi Cave, and Ty West. Wow, what an exciting week for horror it is. I would love to hear your thoughts. What did you guys make of the films Fresh and X? Please do get in touch. You can email me, evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can also find us on all the socials: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We're on Letterboxd. And if you want to discuss this week's films and anything else horror related with fellow listeners, we've got a Discord channel, and we've also got a Facebook group. That's the Evolution of Horror discussion group. If you want extra bonus content every single week while we're on a hiatus, then sign up to our Patreon, patreon.com/Evolution of Horror. And if you want to sign up to our mailing list to hear about future screenings, events, merchandise, and other content, then sign up now, evolutionofhorror.com/newsletter. You can find this podcast on all the usual podcast platforms, and if you get a spare minute, I would be so grateful if you could drop us a little rating and review on Apple Podcasts, as it really helps us get discovered by new listeners. Thank you so much for listening, and join us again soon for another bonus episode of the Evolution of Horror.